It's big and heavy, but it floats like a feather.
Oh my god, look at how locked in those knife edge passes are.
Hey there, I'm John. This is Two Brothers RC, and this is looking back at 2 years of flying the FMS A-10 Warthog twin 70mm. Now, I'm gonna come out and say that I love this jet, but not because FMS sent it to me 2 years ago. I love it because they fixed every problem that the first version of this jet has, which is why I sent it to RC hell after a botched inverted high alpha pass. With the release of AS3X Plus, I'm slowly going back and adjusting every plane that I have and seeing how well they can fly now. And this is probably the most dramatic improvement that I've seen. Something new that we're doing from now on for these follow-up vids is covering the way that the aircraft flew previously to now using a tiered ranking system. That way it'll be easier to see a dramatic difference if one actually exists at all. This is a different beast than the E-flite 64 twin or the twin 80 from Freewing. It isn't particularly hard to fly compared to either jet, but it is more expensive than the E-flite jet and a little less expensive than the Freewing version. It's in this weird price point where you might skip over it because you're not sure that it's worth it. Now look, listen to me carefully. If it can do this, it's worth it. In the tier ranking compared to the last 2 years, I'll be comparing high alpha, livery, takeoff, landing, agility, and its mod worthiness. Check out the chapter called V2 Modifications to see how to get yours to fly like mine. In the high alpha tier ranking, all versions of this jet suck at upright high angles of attack. If you manage to make it work somehow, the A-10's wings will rock like crazy. It's not meant to perform this maneuver. Oddly, my version 1, the stock version 2, and my modified version 2 all do really good inverted high alpha passes, some of the best that I've ever done. Version 1 suffers here a bit because it doesn't have the twin 1900 kV FMS inrunners powering it, which are enough to make the jet do a forward flip out of inverted high alpha.
It's got enough power to flip itself out of it, dude.
Yeah, it pushed right out of it.
Stock struggles because it's too nose heavy to really perform it well, and it doesn't have the throws necessary.
Almost hit that tree.
And my modified version 2 requires some finesse and some practice, but with the right throttle and elevator input, it'll T-pose down the runway, over and over and over again. For high alpha, version 1 gets a C, while stock version 2 gets a B, and the modified version 2 that I'm flying here gets an S. Livery is a super personal thing, right? Not everyone is gonna love what I love, if the angry hate mail that I get on a daily basis is any indication. We all have our personal preferences, and mine is always Tigershark teeth on an A-10. Version 1 is my favorite scheme just because of the Tigershark teeth. If version 2 had the teeth, it would be the winner here for me, but it don't got the teeth, so it ain't. Version 2's warthog face definitely lives up to the namesake of the jet, so ultimately earning it an A. Takeoff is the biggest improvement in general from version 1 to version 2, and version 2 is even better with my Dubrow Treadit low bounce wheel upgrade. One of many issues plaguing version 1 is the uncorrected thrust line. With the motors mounted above the wings and the nozzles pointing straight back, there is no correction for the strong downward pitch moment that this configuration creates, which makes takeoffs difficult to keep tracking straight, especially with the smooth plastic foam wheels that both V1 and V2 ship with. My upgraded version 2 makes this easier, but it still requires finesse. If you slam the throttle on takeoff, it'll slip side to side and you might wreck. Version 1 gets a D here. It's the worst of the 3 jets by far. There's not even a comparison to make. I'd give it an F if I could for you.
You!
Who actually thought that this design was a good idea? Version 2 gets an A. It can't track as precisely as the modified jet with treadless wheels, while the modded jet gets an S. We've got to cover landings too. The stock version 2 and modified version 2 both land really well. The secret to landing like this is to bring them in with power on the backside of the curve. Now that sounds intentionally obtuse, so I'll just make it clear and stop using pilot speak. You need 10 to 30% throttle depending on how the plane is flying at the moment to keep the jet flying down to touchdown. Otherwise it'll just drop like a rock. Speaking of rocks, that awful thrust line on version 1 was part of why it came in like a rock all the time. The gear wouldn't even drop if you had throttle applied, so you had to climb, cut power, and then drop the gear to get them to function. That's one of many reasons that I sent it to RC Hell. Version 2 by comparison is a cool summer breeze, and it's everything that version 1 should have been out of the box. For landings, the modified V2 and original V2 get S rank, while V1 gets a D, unsurprisingly. Another major area where version 1 actually sucks pretty horribly is agility. It's not very agile. Version 2 completely clowns on this plane. I find it hard to believe that they're even related to one another. The servo quality on version 1 is junk tier, and is one of the major differences in version 2 is that it actually uses better servos. There's a good reason that FMS doesn't use the version 1 servos anymore, and it's because they suck. Is it flyable? Yeah, but a brick would fly too if you put some wings and some servos on it. Version 2 servos have more torque, they're faster, and they're stronger too. Basically, everything that you need to make the jet perform. While I would argue that it feels slightly heavier than version 1, it's one of those situations where you can't even really tell on the sticks. On paper, the wing load of the A-10 is supposedly expert level, but reality is quite often very different than what some dude's calculator on the internet says. Obviously, the modified version 2 gets S tier here, stock version 2 gets an A, and of course, version 1 gets C rank. What, you thought I'd give it a D? At least it can fly. And now we find ourselves figuring out whether these planes are worth modifying. Modding a plane is a big decision, and a decision that you quite often can never return from. I'm going to tell you right now, if you own version 1, there's two viable options for it as I see it. Either retire it to be a permanent display piece in your house, or do what our most accomplished destroyer of airplanes on Discord did and crash it into a building, or smash it into the ground. Huge thanks to Scott on Discord for sending these in to us. Version 1 gets a D here, it's not worth modifying. Version 2 gets an S, it's absolutely worth adjusting, and before we wrap up this vid, I'll show you how. Skip to the chapter called V2 Modifications if you can't wait. V2 takes everything that was good about the original and improves it while taking all of the annoying aspects out of V1 entirely. No more crappy gear that refused to drop, better servos, an actual BEC that provides adequate power to the plane, a mostly fixed thrust line. And while we did unfortunately lose the iconic Tigershark teeth, we did get a gorgeous Arctic camo instead with piggy face. It's a solid upgrade, and eventually we will compare the Freewing A-1080 to the FMS A-1070, but that'll be a while from now. If you want to speed that process up for us, we'd love it if you could hit that super thanks button to help us get the Freewing 80 to review and see how it stacks up to the FMS 70. Or if you're in the US and you want this jet after seeing just how awesome it actually is, save 5% off of it with the code FMS2NR by picking it up from the link below, which will also help us pick up the 80 eventually. Now, let's start with the physical mods required to make the jet fly this well. First, get you some Freewing ball links and ball head buckles, they're linked below in the description. Replace the crappy FMS plastic ball links and balls, then set up all of the control linkages to max throws. For all of the control surfaces, put the push rods into the outermost servo arm hole, and put the ball link on the outermost hole of the control horn on every surface but the elevator. Put that ball on the innermost control horn. Then, unscrew the FMS mixing board and push it to the back of the jet, which will allow you to balance over the main wheels using an SMC 5900, or an equivalent pack that weighs similar. For AS3X Plus setup, I used an AR8360T, which you can pick up below as well, and I programmed it with these values: 1x gain, 40 roll, 55 pitch, 40 yaw, default stick priority, lock rate of 70 roll, default for other axes with default release rate. And for the nose wheel, I used an extend delay of 5 seconds with 2x gain sensitivity and a 50% rate gain. This helped it track pretty straight for the most part. The wheel upgrade isn't mandatory, but it is something that I highly recommend that you do for both grass and pavement flying to reduce the shock being transferred to the gear mounts. Also, let's be real here, rubber wheels sound awesome. To remove the wheels and replace them, you need to rotate the nuts right instead of left. It's like a wallflower from Bath & Body Works. Yeah, that's my favorite shop. So what? You want to fight about it? We'll go outside right now. Unbolting the wheel nuts from the struts is done backwards, so turn right to loosen the axle one more time. You will shear the nut head off trying to undo it going lefty-loosey. The nose wheel accepts a Dubro 2-inch low-bounce treaded wheel, and the mains accept 2.5-inch treaded low-bounce wheels. All of these are in the description below. And it's always a good idea to have some grease on the hubs from Superlube so that they'll rotate freely and noiselessly too. That covers my upgrades and what it took to get V2 to fly as well as it does here. If you like this review, hit that like button and join us on Discord, and if you have your own version 1 A-10 and you can recreate the Frank Sylvester A-10 curb stomp video for us, I'll send you a Two Brothers sticker for the trouble. See you guys next week with what's hopefully the full review of the Freewing 90mm F-16 version 2.